In response to Governor Hickenlooper's response in the Syrian refugee crisis, several Colorado Republicans spoke in opposition. Representative Mike Kaufman stated that we have no way of conducting thorough background checks, while Representative Scott Tipton called the plan naive and irresponsible. Mike, there were other Republicans that came out and said this. These were just some of the high-profile federal representatives. What do you think of the Republican response?
Well, it's not just a Republican response, actually. If you look the other day, enough Democrats joined Republicans in the Congress to vote on a veto-proof pause on this, not to stop it, to pause it, including Representative Jared Polis from Boulder. And so it was clearly something that at first fell neatly along partisan lines, right? But then we're seeing that that's not necessarily the case. And by the way, from the executive branch's perspective, if this is just another example of President Obama really acting like an imperial presidency and an imperial executive branch. Basically, anyone who disagrees with him on this was a xenophobic and or racist, and then all of a sudden 40-something Democrats in the Congress crossed the aisle to say, look, let's just stop and think about it. So it's not a Republican response, not anymore.
Penn, I mean, obviously we've had the response from the federal Congress, but we've seen also that it becomes a local issue. Do you think it's going to become partisan, or is it truly going to be a bipartisan issue?
You know, with the exception of the vote in the House, I think it is a partisan issue. We talked about the 24 states that had voted to not go along with the president's directive. All but one of them are Republican governors. That's not a coincidence. This is falling along partisan lines. It is quite possible that as the conversation continues and more details come out about how the verification and reporting and everything else will work, hopefully the debate will descend where it needs to descend into the policy and into the practical conversation about, you know, how does this work? Is it workable? And if we get to a point where it's not workable, I suspect the president will rethink this. I think what he's given us now is his initial reaction and his initial thought about how we as a country ought to respond to this. But I think it is partisan at this point, but I think there's the possibility that that reaction may change over time.
Ben, we're beginning that hyperactive election season, not only with the presidential races, but it's going to become big here in Colorado with our Senate race, things like that. Does this have enough legs to become a political partisan issue for the 2016 election?
I think so, because I think security has remained a prominent issue both locally and nationally when we talk about the national body politic. You know, and it's interesting to hear some of these points from folks on either side of the aisle, you know, talking about the safety and security of it. You know, there was an interesting piece in the New York Times that detailed how, what's the number, 2,300 plus folks who are on the terrorism watch list have been able to go and purchase weapons and firearms in our country because the NRA and conservative forces have worked hard to keep that loophole open. And yet, on the same coin, they're saying we can't have these people even coming into the country. So I think it will remain an issue. There's so many things that can come out of it. There's no way it will die down. And certainly with our, you know, unique history in Colorado with episodes of gun violence and then our national history of recent history of having attacks, it won't go away, and I think that we'll see a lot of different permutations and issues come out of it.
Somewhere David Coppel's longing to rebut, but he's at a family wedding right this week, so that's okay. He'll be back next time. Patty, wrap it up for us.
Well, it's fascinating to think about DIA, which has just celebrated its 20th year and was designed before 2011, the 9/11, sorry. But it's incredible the difference in security, how that airport would have been designed differently. They're talking about redoing the terminal, which obviously was designed before you had to have more security. Used to be you just had the little magic wand to go over things because they didn't want you to hijack the plane for Cuba. But so we're all rethinking security, and it is absolutely going to affect us as we think about who would be the next president, because you think, how would they respond in something like this? Would they actually know where these countries are? What would they do if they suddenly heard about a hotel being taken over, as we did this morning? So it is going to affect and it's really going to make people less likely to go on a flyer with someone who's an untried politician, I think.